driven past the address on so many times, so many occasions, and at that particular time he's driven past in his van. He's seen Joseph Nee's van parked outside the address on Finch Lane, and within half an hour he's on foot. We believe has gone round to another address on Snowbury to collect the guns, and then has walked up, guns in his pockets, and he was ready to take Joseph Nee out, had he seen him. We talked about would he have done it in daylight. We've had firearms incidents that have occurred during the daylight hours, but as we know there were 2 guns, and this is somebody that was very determined, and that was a key point for us as well. So being able to go back to CPS with the GSR, with that piece of CCTV footage.
It must have been quite a difficult decision to release him back after the first arrest. Was it something that was quite nerve-wracking, quite frustrating? Because of course, once he's back out in the community, there's potentially chance for him to get rid of evidence and intimidate people.
It was a nerve-wracking moment. We knew the community wouldn't like it. We know we didn't like it. We knew we hadn't got the evidence. However, it presented opportunity for us because then, we went and executed further warrants. When we went to search his house at Grenadier Drive, we saw the absence of CCTV. It had all been removed. We did some work around phones, as Jude's been talking about. We knew that his phone had gone off on the 18th of August. Who in the right mind lives without a mobile phone nowadays? They just don't, do they?
Drug dealer as well.
Well, anybody. You speak to anybody that goes without a phone for more than a week, it's a harrowing experience for them, isn't it? So these little nuggets were coming together really in terms of piecing the prosecution case together, and obviously with the CPS and with the council, Aidan Coughlin, Henry Riding, we sat about preparing the prosecution case. And we were still pursuing other witnesses and trying to get them on board. That was really, really important for us. As Jude's saying, there was little pieces, little turning points during the inquiry, and that was quite a significant one, really. When we saw him dressed between 3:30 and 4 o'clock, dressed to kill, going towards the address, where he was. And we made a big play during the trial, which was right. Where was that van on day? And that was a key part of the prosecution case, wasn't it? And the clothing that was worn, you will know. We spent a long time analysing that and looking at the clothing that was worn. We brought specialists in, invested a lot of time in comparing and contrasting different types of clothing that he wore. He changed his jacket. And then quite a compelling moment really was when he parked his van up as well at 9 o'clock at night at Aspis Road and parked it right at the very corner. For us, begging belief really that he wasn't the gunman. He parks his van up and then we've got the gunman on CCTV walking down Finch Lane to go and do the shooting. I think the phrase we used was like an affront to common sense, really, that it wasn't him, and that became a key part of the trial as well, and showing the van coming down. So the CCTV work that was done was phenomenal. Piecing all that together as well, you saw through the course of the trial, the timeline, the professional manner in which it was all presented, when we're thanking people, the work that goes on behind the scenes through the unsung heroes, if you like, of the investigation, the people that spend time making sure that's right, joining together and proving that the gunman can't have gone anywhere else. So all the hours that we spent reviewing the footage and saying, that car hasn't gone there or this car has not gone there, that is really, really important. Sometimes people don't understand that, do they?
And then coming in and out of the house, because you have to remember at the time that we deliver our case to CPS, we don't know that he's going to say that's me. So we didn't know that. So we're having to say, well, why do we know that that's him? And we were having to go back days before to find out who'd been at Mab Lane, and almost counting people in and counting people back out again.
Just to explain, during the trial, Cashman admitted he was the man that you were shown in CCTV for most of the day, in fact, until around, I think, half an hour.
It was from 9. It was the 9 o'clock. So as he parks up his van at Aspis, and as Mr. Baker has just described, the minute that you then see the gunman on foot, he says it's not him, but all of the other journeys were him. And then for around about an hour and a half until after the shooting, and then when the van moves again, that's him again. So he probably, because of that, we didn't know at that stage. We didn't know that until the defence statement came through, which was February.
Yeah.
So up until that point, we need to try and identify every bit of how are we saying that's him on every single piece of footage that we had. How do we know that's him? How can we say that's him?
Were you surprised when he accepted all that?
I was surprised that he'd accepted all of that and not that bit, and I couldn't get my head around how that was going to play out in court. And I'm not sure the jury did either, because I think that was possibly one of his downfalls, by admitting to all of that. And then, you know, because
of the work you'd done, it would have been equally as difficult for him to deny, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. It probably left him nowhere to go. And that was the beauty really about the investigation, that the amount of work that we were able to do to uncover what had actually gone on. And as Mr. Baker talks about, it's negating as well as finding those positives as well. We were able to say, well, we know he hasn't gone that way, we know he hasn't gone that way, and we know he hasn't gone that way. This is the only other way he could have gone. And that was proved within the trial again, when I think he said he was 99% certain he hadn't gotten in the van. And then when we played the footage, it was apparent that he had, and had to sort of change that account whilst giving his own evidence.
When that defence statement comes in February this year, that's the first time essentially that you hear Cashman's version of events, what he was doing on that day, what's happening in these CCTV clips that you've pieced together, and he admits is him. What was he saying that he was doing that day?
Well, I think he talks about it within the trial itself, and he talked about the fact that he'd been driving round. I think he'd been to see a few of his friends that he was refusing to really name or say where they lived, didn't really know their names or didn't want to name them, didn't really want to talk about what they did for a living, whether they were involved in criminality. So we didn't know until that defence statement came in, and I think that was the point that our King's Counsel was trying to get across, was the fact that from a timeline of events, obviously we provide what we have to the Crown Prosecution Service when they agree to charge, and then we have to provide and serve our evidence, basically what is our case, to the defence, and we only have a short period to be able to do that in. Obviously there's more that will come in afterwards, but I think we provided ours around about November. I don't know the exact date. He has had a lot of that information early on and was able then to form his own defence of what he wanted to say. And that was something that Mr. McLachlan was getting across to the jury for that timeline. And
what he's essentially saying is that these trips are all to do with his everyday drug dealing activities.
Yeah, without a phone.
Without a phone, yeah.
And so obviously you arrest him again. I can't remember the exact date.
29th September.
29th September. Your case, you've covered these extra little things in your case. You've got everything that you need. You think, what was the moment like when the CPS authorised charging him with murder? How did that feel as an investigation team?
Fabulous relief, I'm going to be honest. I think we were highly relieved. It's probably the best way we could phrase it. We were just so pleased for Cheryl, John, that we could go and tell them that we were able to charge someone. Plus, members in the community that has assisted us, you know, they felt as though we were listening to them, not just the police but the Crown Prosecution Service. The fact he was going to be remanded, presented a further opportunity. So we went and charged him, and then we went and told family. And that was an important moment for us. It was an important moment for the community as well, telling them that we'd listened and we started to build a case. It wasn't concluded then, because it's not, never is. The real work starts for us as the police after charge, building that prosecution, what we can use in evidence and what we can't, and still pushing for further evidence really, because we're always looking for opportunity. Like I mentioned before, we'd like the firearms back, of course we would. But no, it was a key moment. And I think
it really was. I think I was liaising with Maria Core from CPS throughout the whole time he was in custody. We were having to provide updates, so the team were giving me updates, and we were able to update her constantly of what was happening, where we were up to. Eventually, when it came through to say I'm going to authorise the charge and timed that, and I came through to tell you, and we got the team in, didn't we?
Yeah.
It was a lovely moment. It was a lovely moment because everybody had worked so hard and everybody wanted justice for Olivia and for the family. It was a real proud moment for us all.
It was emotional.
It was.
Yeah, highly emotional. So I would say it was relief. It was a whole mixture of emotions, like the conviction was as well.
To go out, I think, and to tell mum and dad, it's almost like you're delighted, but actually you're not really delighted, are you, because of what you're delighted for, and that's where the mix of emotions comes in. You're proud that you've managed to do something though for a family that have suffered so much, should never have been in that position. So it was really emotional going out and seeing both Cheryl and John, giving them that news and managing that, along with making sure that they were the first to hear it before we got news out into the press as well, because it was so vital that the family didn't hear it last or from somebody else. Mum and dad needed to know before anyone.
And Cheryl was such a big part of this case. She was not only a victim in the sense that she's lost her daughter, she was wounded herself, but she's the impressions that she's given in court and in a video evidence is that she's an incredibly strong woman. What was your impression of Cheryl and how she was after the awful incident?
I think we'll both answer this because we both got some strong views. I thought she's absolutely phenomenal. The way she conducted herself through the course of the trial was exceptional. I think some of the things she saw and heard and had to relive, and that was important for us as well, because we wouldn't put families through that if we didn't feel as though we've got a strong case, and that was important to us. And that was hard to charge someone when there were pieces of evidence that you've touched on before that you thought may have been missing. Obvious DNA or a key witness that sees the shooting. So making that decision was really, really important to us. But her and her family have been fantastic, as is John, father, because you listen to his victim impact statements and the impact he's had on him and his family, and some of the things that were said outside court. That shouldn't be forgotten. But, going back to Cheryl, she was a key witness. It was in her house. Her daughter was cowering behind her, scared because she's heard gunshots. Probably the worst thing. You've got to sit and watch her achieving best evidence video interview. It makes you cry your eyes out. You can't not be upset by watching that, as everybody was that was in court that day. And for her to go through it again, I just thought she showed such bravery.
She did. She's a very, very strong individual. I mean, I could not have done what she's done. As Mr. Baker says, to be there and probably carry the guilt of why didn't the bullet stop at her hand, all of those things, why, if she'd have just moved over ever so slightly, there'll be 1,001 questions that she will constantly ask herself for the rest of of her life. But what a strong woman she is. She was just incredible. There were times that you have to warn of what's potentially going to come up during the court case, and it was almost, Jude, what more is going to shock me? And you just, it hits home, doesn't it? What more is going to shock her when she's watched her own daughter suffer in the way that she has, something that no one should ever go through. And she was just amazing.
Yeah,
I can't, the strength and that inner strength that she's had, and her 2 children as well, Ryan and Chloe have just been brilliant. They've both had to struggle through losing a sister, not being able to do anything on the night, because that's how it is, isn't it? You're frantic, you don't know what to do. Having to relive all of that again, having to go, as she described, and move house and see where everything happened must have been horrific for them all, and they're never ever going to forget it, are they?
And did the strength that the family showed help you in some of the it must have been some difficult moments in the investigation?
Oh, absolutely.
Give you strength to sort of do the job that you're required to do?
Absolutely. I think one of the things for me is I remember whispering to Cheryl when I said, when I first met her, we will get him if it's the last thing I do. And you shouldn't make promises like that, but you're so invested in it. It was a real hard time, and I think even when we got to that charge, we've got this woman, this family, John, we've never met any of them before, and they're putting their full trust in us to get justice for their daughter, and that's really, really hard. It's a lot of pressure on the team, but once we got to charge, you've then got to do, as Mr. Baker is saying, it's all of that hard work then, and there's that real fear of not getting the right result that you want at the end. So you've then got to be open with them, you've got to be able to make sure that those expectations are being managed, and that's difficult as well, because you put so much pressure on yourself because you want it to be right for them, because it's a tiny little piece that we can do to try and help some of that pain and suffering that I can't imagine what they're all going through and will continue to go through.
And that applies to the wider community as well, doesn't it?
Yeah.
This case being solved is so vital to that community being able to heal and move forward, isn't it? Did that sort of weigh in your minds a little bit?
Yeah, just going back to the family, actually, I think our family liaison officers were just phenomenal. I think tragedy opens a gateway into family life that nobody ever wants, and they never want it, and unfortunately we're forced to get to know them because of the way the investigation needs to be. I just think that family officers on both sides of the family were just outstanding. Nobody will ever know the trauma that they were going through as well, reliving what had gone on with Cheryl and John.
It's a difficult job that in policing that's not always sort of highlighted in these cases.
It's such an important one, and I think we were blessed.
We were.
Really good people that did that, and it's hard. They'll always be with them, I think, because of the way what they've been through. But you're right, going back to the community, I think the result was so important for the community, not just locally. I think nationally everybody was outraged the fact that a child can be shot in her own home in what was a nice residential street. Somebody shooting up and down the road and then chasing someone to the house. Quite rightly, everybody was shocked, and that's what I suppose we're so relieved and pleased about, aren't we, that justice has been served. I don't think anybody that was involved in the trial would think that justice has not been served in this case.
And getting to the trial, it's obviously you've done all that work. the family are so invested in the outcome. Everyone's desperate for justice to be served. How were you feeling during the trial? It kind of have to cede control, don't you, of the case a little bit, and then watch it all unfold, and there's not much you can do.
Anxious, very anxious, because of all the things Jude mentioned there. I think we're desperate for justice for the family. We know that there's a jury there that needs to believe in what we believe. We're so heavily invested. We have been for the best part of 6-7 months, whether it was prior to trial, that we see things differently. We're too subjective. I can't see it objectively because we've lived and breathed it, and all the investigation team have. We know what it means to witnesses, how nervous and how frightened they were of coming to court. They were really anxious.
You yourself were called as a witness at one stage, so I mean, obviously yourself, you're a professional witness. I guess that you can put yourself in their shoes, and I imagine you still really, it's nerve-wracking. You know, this thing's been your life for 9 months, and you're getting questioned about it. And
definitely. Well, you saw that. You sat next to me. Of course, when you give evidence during a trial, but this was like no other trial, you are anxious. I think, as the defence said, they were trying to pick holes in the investigation. That's their job. And we feel as though sometimes the investigation's on trial.
Absolutely.
For the month that took place. And it is, rightly so, because that's how justice is served in this country. You know, we present a prosecution case, the defence challenge it. Thankfully, the jury saw the evidence that we gathered. We were really grateful that they got the decision they did. But it's the trial itself, I think, for the police and everybody involved, not least the witnesses and the family. You know, the family were dreading it, of course they were. Sitting and listening through some of the forensic evidence for mum and dad must have been horrendous. You can't begin to imagine listening to the evidence in relation to the bullet hole that went through Olivia, and just horrible. We try and prepare the family as best we can, don't we, for that, but until you're there in court listening to the way it comes out, you'll never understand that, will you? I don't think.
And it's hard because you've got to get that balance right, because we can't tell them too much before the actual trial itself as well. So it's important that the evidence, it's almost just before the evidence is being given, you're trying to reassure them or tell them exactly what's happening next. And that's hard sometimes. It must have been hard for John, because John obviously wasn't there when it all happened, whereas Cheryl was. So Cheryl knew what was coming next, or could understand, because she was living and breathing something that she'd already lived through. Whereas with John, he didn't know. So that was difficult, and and his sister and his his two lovely girls as well. It was hard for them all. It's hard for them all to listen what was going on. There were difficulties and challenges with the size of the court. That brings its own difficulties anyway. Managing the dynamics of sort of Cashman's family, Kaylee Ann Sweeney's family, and then it was difficult. We had press in the public gallery, which is the way the court is positioned. It's actually almost in a separate room. It's a separate entrance to it, and you're in almost like a glass bubble, or a bubble as they called it. And that it was difficult. It was difficult to manage. There was you could feel the tension in the air. There was that nervousness of something, going wrong within the court setting. You're just constantly on tenterhooks. You want everything to go right. You're fearful of getting to almost those final stages, and something happening where we end up having a mistrial or a new jury sworn in, or and to go through it all again. I don't know if there's any of us would have had the energy to have been able to do that. A real emotional time throughout the whole trial.
Thomas Cashman, obviously, during the trial, that was the first you would have heard him speaking openly about that day. and probably about anything, because he went no comment in both of his police interviews. He refused to answer any questions that you put to him during the interview process. So I was just interested what you made of him on the stand, how he came across, and whether anything he said or did surprise you particularly.
Do you want me? I'll answer that then. I thought he came across as being untruthful. Was my overriding impression of him. I didn't think the jury would like what he was saying. The fact that he refused to name who he was supplying drugs to, who was supplying him, I don't think that was going to come across very well. He told people that he effectively was earning £250,000 from supplying cannabis into the community, as though it was just an accepted occupation. Clearly it isn't, and people don't want that. And we were picking that up from the information that we received into the community. You never know which way a jury's seen that. But I thought, particularly the second day, Mr. McLaughlin cross-examined him. I thought he had some real difficulties, and he unpicked him, really. It was my take on the way the trial went. I thought it was real skilled cross-examination, which left him in a difficult position, I felt, with the jury. So he didn't say anything really that surprised us. Clearly, he said some bad things about the witness, which probably we anticipated. That's horrible for us to hear, because we cared about our witnesses and we cared about the impact that it's going to have on them. Clearly there was a sexual element to it, which people would find interesting. Of course they would. The reality of it is, it was an important part of the case, because that's the reason that he went there that night, because he clearly trusted her when he felt that he'd got no one else to turn to in that moment of need, because it had all gone so badly wrong. That was my overarching feeling of the way he came across.
Must have been quite strange for Olivia's family, being sat there in the courtroom when so much of the evidence is focusing on things like the relationship between Cashman and the witness. Things that essentially have nothing to do with their little girl. I think it really brings home the point that this should never have been brought to their door. They're essentially looking at someone else's life, people essentially strangers, and yet all this is by chance just come to their door. And it's just such a strange few weeks for them here. A lot of it's not focused on Olivia, when essentially that's what it's all about at the end of the day.
It was all about Olivia, wasn't it? Of course it was, and that was hard for them to hear. Clearly it was hard for the witness. You heard her say herself that she felt as though she was examined the first day for about 5 hours, all about her private life. Now, that's hard for us from police point of view, because we try desperately to bring witnesses to court. That experience of her must have been really challenging. We know it was, because we've spoken to her since. Upsetting, but clearly that's why we've got a High Court judge presiding over the trial to, I suppose, to understand what's acceptable and what isn't. And clearly it was allowed to continue because it was a line of inquiry that needed pursuing.
Yeah, I think just going back to your question around Cashman in the box giving evidence, I think he came across, as Mr. Baker said, as a liar. But I think he prepared himself very well. I think he came across as rehearsed. And I think the thing that stood out for me was he spoke about the normality of a high-end drug dealer, like it was an everyday job. There was no remorse there for being the person that he was within the community, dealing drugs, regardless of what categorisation of drugs they were. But there was literally nothing. It was just normal business. but I felt that he seemed to almost come across as a little bit cocky at times. Like, I've read this evidence, I know what you've got, and I've made my case out. But you could see, for me, you could see through what he was saying, and for me it was just lies. And that came through.
There was a little glimpse, wasn't there, of fear he causes as well, which is what the community was saying to us. When he was asked questions about how does he enforce when your debt's not paid, we saw a little glimpse of what he's like.
Yeah, just a little bit, didn't we?
Yeah.
You could just see that little bit of a glint in his eye.
During the trial, Mr McLaughlin, the prosecutor, asked him what he'd do if Paul Russell refused to hand over his graft phone and his car to pay a debt. And that question seemed to catch him a little bit out, didn't he? And I think his response was, oh, well, he'd get a punch, wouldn't he? And I think that kind of exposed the kind of...
It did,
like you said,
because he started saying, well, what happens if someone doesn't pay a debt? Well, I'll take their phone and I'll take the car. What, you just turn up and you just take it? And Mr McLaughlin pushed and pushed on that. And you could see, well, what, somebody's just going to allow you to come and take their car? Of course they're not. And that was where I think his true colours started to really show through. But just to speak about drug dealing, a high end earning £250,000, and to take it all in your own stride and not be fearful of anything.
He clearly had people working for him as well, didn't he?
Well, that's the menace around serious and organised crime, isn't it? Which is what we've seen during this trial. You are looking at the impact it has on everybody in that area. You know, you're looking at kids that are coming up through schooling that are just fearful, that are looking at the money being earned. It impacts on everybody in that area, and we know it has because the investigations took us there. And I think that acceptability was horrendous, and that came across during the trial, that people think that's okay, and it clearly isn't. People don't want that, to be honest. But that's how crime evolves, and it's not just here in Merseyside, it's in any big city in the country that people are living in fear because of debts that are owed, manufactured debts in relation to drugs and guns. And let's be honest, you asked the question early on, why did it happen? We may never know the answer to that, but we can surmise that there was a feud and somebody wanted Joseph Neave dead. Thomas Cashman was the man that pulled the trigger. We've never got back to exactly why that happened, and we didn't really. We'd like to, of course we would, because it allows us to better understand exactly what's going on. But our prosecution case wasn't that. It was just, this is what did happen, rather than why. And clearly, Olivia's family would like to know, and so would other members of the community. But it wouldn't be based on fact, and that's why we've not said.
And obviously, Joseph Neave himself was a key party to what happened, and he was a victim himself in a lot of ways. He was shot twice or three times, I think. Did you get the impression that he cooperated with you as fully as he could have done?
I'll answer that. We interviewed him when he'd been shot. The man that shot him had a balaclava on. He didn't know who did it. We always want more, don't we, from all the victims and witnesses. I would have liked more from as an investigation point of view, but we didn't get there. Is my answer to that.
And then just back to the trial, so I think around 3.5 weeks is when the jury was sent out to start the deliberations. Can you just tell me about the mood between yourselves and your colleagues waiting for that verdict to come in? How were you feeling? Were you getting much sleep at that point?
Well, I certainly didn't get much sleep, and I think that was replicated throughout the whole of the team. Everyone was nervous. I think, as I said at the very start, around sort of having the right skills and abilities and people being able to work almost independently with telecoms, exhibits, CCTV. The staff put a lot of pressure on themselves because they don't want, obviously, anything to fail, but they don't want it to be that something that they've done, they've missed. to cause that failure as well. So they do put, as much as that's our responsibility, they do put those pressures on themselves. So everybody, I'd be very surprised if anyone had any sleep. I know certainly my team were really anxious. I think you could have sort of cut the air with a knife in the room that we were in. You know, you worried, you're trying to manage those expectations for the family as well, you know, speaking to Cheryl and speaking to John through the family liaison officers, us speaking with them, just to say, look, you know, this is now out of our hands. We have presented, we've done all that we possibly can. This is now in the hands of a jury, it's in the hands of 12 people to see what they think. And, you know, it's just a waiting game. And it's hard.
Did you have doubts during that period? Was there anything creeping in, or did you feel confident?
You always have doubts with that. Well, I do. There's always that doubt. So try and remain positive. I used to hone in on one of my sergeants who was so positive with everything, and it was just like, where is he? I need him here, you know, because you just, that minute that you have that doubt, you start to panic because you've invested everything. You know, we all had, as a whole team, we'd invested so much of our time, our energy. People were so passionate that you know, when you want something so desperately and it's out of your control, that's the only way to describe it, really. So, of course, you have those little bits of doubt, and then you think, no, come on, this is, you know, it's there, and so...
Never in doubt.
He was never in doubt.
And then, obviously, a jury send word that they've reached a verdict. I think there was a little delay while the families of both parties were sort of rounded up and escorted into court. That was a long 15 minutes, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. So I put the call into the families, and there was a bit of a mixed message with the first family. So I had to ring them back, where are you? So it was, yeah, I remember going down to meet them, and my legs, I felt like I had the flu, you know, when your legs are like jelly, and they literally wouldn't work going down the stairs to get the family, trying to help the family and prepare them. Again, you're doing it the whole time, but just that final preparation, look, you know, this is where it's at. We talked about sort of the exit strategy of coming out of the court as well, and that was really important because obviously we had Thomas Cashman's family there, as I explained before. We had Kaylee Ann Sweeney and her family there, but also we had the Pratts and the Korbels as well to manage. So whatever that verdict was going to be, the family had to stay within the courtroom, which was going to be really, really hard. So hard had it not come back really in our favour. So that was difficult preparing for that. But yeah, it was probably the longest 15 minutes. And then I just remember holding Cheryl's hand, and I felt terrible because I didn't realise it was a sore hand, and I felt awful. So she laughs at me about it, but you know, you feel terrible. And she just said, Jude, my hand. And you know, because you just become so, you know, you're so fixated on that juror, what they're actually going to say. And people say, don't they, if they look at them, they're guilty, and if they don't look at them, they're not guilty, and all of that. And
you can't help but speculate, can you?
Yeah.
It's...
Until you hear those words.
And can you put into words that feeling when guilty to the murder of Olivia Pratt-Korbel, guilty of the attempted murder of Joseph Nee, guilty of wounding Cheryl Korbel, and the 2 possession charges? How did that feel?
I didn't hear the other 4. I heard that first one, and my brain sort of stopped working. I barely heard what was being spoken about then. As soon as I heard the guilty for Olivia, I knew that the rest would follow probably, because it would make sense that in order to shoot, then you have to follow all of the others. in order to shoot Olivia, that is, you would then have to have had the guns, you'd have had to have had. And so I knew, I think, that even though the words were being spoken, they weren't really going in at all.
I think I felt proud. Proud of the investigation, proud of the key witness. I felt for her, I felt she'd been vindicated and come forward doing what she'd done. I was thinking about how she must be feeling, because clearly I was in a room with family, I could see how they were feeling. I'm proud of the work that had gone on, really, that got to that result. So, it's a horrible feeling, isn't it, waiting for a jury to come back. There's nothing like it. If you're in that courtroom and you can cut the atmosphere with a knife and you can see everybody coming back in, including the judge, it's just horrendous, really. But when we got verdict, I was like you, when we heard the first one, because I knew full well once we got one, we got the 5, there could be nothing else. So, I'm bothered with Cashman, really. He's the defendant, isn't he? It's irrelevant, really. It's just justice being served, and that was the important thing, I thought. Looked at you, emotionally drained because of what it does to you, I think. And obviously the family sat behind us.
You both worked on a lot of relatively high-profile murder investigations. In terms of the emotion of the case, how does this differ, and how does it differ, the feeling after the guilty verdicts?
For me, like no other, I don't think, if I'm going to be honest, the 9-year-old girl, you should never compare like for like in the police. But because of the scrutiny around the investigation, nationally, regionally, I just felt, I think as a team, we were under pressure.
Yeah.
We wanted, plus we see family regularly. I could see in their faces, they were talking about when he would be convicted, and we're talking about if, because it's never a done deal going to Crown Court and standing trial. That's the way justice works. We just felt really anxious, didn't we?
Yeah.
As a team, when we could see in each other's faces, not just the investigation team, the prosecution team. We felt when the jury went out, we'd done our best, which is all we can ever ask, really. That there was nothing that came up during the course of the trial that we thought would cause us a significant problem, because that's always a risk. Of course, we don't know everything. What we do is we prepare a snapshot of our understanding of it. We pursue the truth, don't we? That's what the police do. But we can never know it all. We can't. And sadly, the people that do are the ones often standing trial.
Obviously, sentenced a few days later, I think on the 3rd of April. Most of the people we spoke to were not quite expecting such a high minimum term. What message do you think that sentence sends out? 42 years before he's got even a chance of walking as a free man. One of the highest sentences other than a whole life tariff that we've ever heard of in Merseyside.
I think it was huge. I think that sends out a really positive message for. I know Mr. Baker's talking about he felt really proud when the verdict came in. I think it took so much longer for me for it to actually register. Your emotions are just all over the place, and you eventually come back down, and then you start thinking of what we've actually achieved, what is the whole team, the community, what we've done together. And then you start focusing on, well, what is the likelihood? What is he likely to get? So those questions are always in your mind. And I think you were in court with us, weren't you? And you heard that there was a gasp in court with the 42 years. I think it sends a really strong message to the communities to say, look, this is what happens. We've got youngsters coming forward. We've heard that Cashman himself is a family man. Is he a role model for his children? And I would like to think that message that's given out to those younger generations that crime does not pay, It doesn't matter what he's had, the lifestyle he's had, that's gone, and it will never ever come back. He will be an old man before he is released, if that ever happens. So I think it's a really incredibly proud message to send out.
It's obviously been an incredibly tough year for Merseyside from a policing perspective. The latter half of the year, we've obviously had the 3 murders in August, and then just when you think it can't get any more horrendous, there's the murder of Jackie Rutter in Wirral, there's the murder of Ellie Edwards on Christmas Eve. Do you have any kind of sense of what might be what fueled that period, and why when firearms discharges were dropping so dramatically, things started to go so horribly wrong again? Is there any sort of theories you've got as to why we had this period in the latter half of 2022, and what is the key to tackling that?
That's a really difficult question. I think there were separate sets of circumstances that resulted in unexpected death, sadly mostly females as well. What I would say is that Merseyside Police is committed to tackling serious and organised crime. That won't change. We're committed to taking guns off the streets of Merseyside. I think this investigation and this sentence will send out a really positive message. One, for witnesses that are involved, but secondly, to deter people from taking guns to the streets of Liverpool and Merseyside. That 42 years, which Jude just talked about, is massive. It's a massive sentence. The judge couldn't give him a whole life tariff, she said, but then she did. 42 years at the age of 34 is a life tariff. And I genuinely think that the coverage this case has received will make people sit up and take notice of crime here. And we are relentless in our pursuit of those involved. The crimes you spoke about there, we are steadfast in our determination to bring people to justice. And we will do that. I think, as I just said, that 42-year sentence is really impactful. Hopefully that'll stem that pattern that we've just seen.
Obviously, Cashman wasn't there when the sentence was passed. He refused to come up from the cells and enter the dock as he was sentenced. What did you make of his decision to not bother to show his face when he was sentenced?
Like everybody else, he should have been there, in my opinion. We sat and listened to those victim impact statements. John's was read out. Chloe showed the strength to read hers. Cheryl, how she dreamt to hers, we'll never know. I think that's really impacted for victims of crime, that the defendants, convicted defendants, is there and should listen to that.
I think one of the powerful messages as well for me, there may be some sense of amongst people who are involved in serious and organised crime that they're somehow not as bad as him. They have some sort of moral superiority to him, even if they are involved in firearms offences. And I think the message that was sent out by this trial is Cashman wasn't targeting Olivia, he was targeting Joseph Nee. A stray bullet has caused this devastation, and every time somebody goes out into the streets with a gun, that can happen. Do you think that has a potential to change minds and change lifestyles out in Merseyside?
Definitely. Undoubtedly, shooting people recklessly in the street, there's always a risk, isn't there, that somebody else is going to be injured. You know, the first bullet went through a fence. Sorry, the second bullet went through a fence. It went into a bay window wall. Now, if that had been a few inches higher, that would have gone into the house. That could have been somebody else dead inside that house. When you take a gun to the streets of Merseyside and start firing recklessly like that, there's always the chance that somebody other than your intended target is going to be injured or killed. And we've seen that. And that's why this is such an important case, to hopefully try and stop that happening.
Yeah, and I think hopefully the other cases that we've got that you've mentioned before, they'll be coming up for trial, that, we will get the result that we want on those as well, and equally heavy sentences in order to get that message out continuously. I think my fellow DCIs that are running those cases, again, are working just as hard as we've worked, to seek justice for those families. I know there's still a lot of work going on behind the scenes in respect of Jacqueline Rutter, and it's really, really difficult to manage those, and the Sam Rimmer case as well. And it's sometimes hard when one team gets a charge and the other one still, it makes it look as though it's not the same work going into it, but you couldn't be more wrong. It's people are working flat out to get those charges for those individuals, just so the family have got some justice.
Of course, there are other cases of similar circumstances there that remain unsolved. Do you think the publicity around these cases may shake something loose there? I'm thinking in particular of the Yusuf Sonko murder in 2017, I think it was. Boy seems to have been caught by a stray bullet, young man killed. Are you hoping that the kind of way that this case has progressed can give people confidence to come forward and potentially provide new information?
Definitely, yeah. And that's the purpose of doing interviews like this, really. We want people to see what we're like, police are like, and how we do support people. People are fearful. You mentioned the Sonko case there specifically. We know there were people there that haven't got the confidence to come forward and tell us what's gone on. Like any other undetected or unsolved murders or serious crimes that have taken place, we want people to take confidence from what's just happened at court. I think the Cashman conviction and sentence makes the streets of Merseyside safer. I genuinely believe that, because of the threat he posed. And likewise, supporting us to prosecute other people that are involved in other murders, we will be doing exactly the same if we're able to prosecute them.
And I think I've asked you this question in a previous interview, but you've mentioned a few times the guns are still out there. Probably people involved in helping him to store those guns, supply those guns. Maybe someone other than Cashman has disposed of those guns. And there's obviously more around the feud that you mentioned in terms of whether Cashman decided to attack Joseph Nee off his own back, or if there's somebody else involved in that. Do you feel there is unfinished business around this case? There's more you'd still like to do, more you'd still like to achieve in terms of convictions and charges?
We've arrested a lot of people. Clearly, arresting, charging and convicting are two separate matters, really. It doesn't matter what we think, it's about what we can prove, and that's why we want potential witnesses to keep coming forward and keep talking to us. You mentioned the two guns. Clearly we like them back because we don't want them ever being used again anywhere in the country or elsewhere. If people are sat knowing where they are, then we want them to come forward and allow us to take them up. People have shown confidence in the investigation, and because of that, justice has been served, and hopefully, I've mentioned the witness time and time again, knowing she's done the right thing in the circumstances, I think other people should look at themselves in the mirror and say, I need to do the right thing and come forward and support where I live. Not supporting the police, supporting where I live. I think that's the best way to look at it. We will do our job, the police, but give us the opportunity and the support that we need to do that.
Yeah, I think that's. I think I would second that. I think the communities of Dovecot, what they've helped us achieve on this, they've taken back their community. They've done the hardest bit, helping us to convict him. For me now, if they can tell us where those guns are, I know that would help with the pain and suffering that Cheryl and John are both going through, along with the siblings of Olivia. It would really help to support them going through their own life sentence now.